Hello, welcome to the Sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Open Series in Worcester. I'm Nick Miller alongside notable brewer Ashok Chitturi. How you doing, sir?
Pretty good, man.
Pretty good. We've seen you around the legacy scene, always playing some crazy brews, but you've been on this Affinity build for quite a while in Legacy, and I want you to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of this deck in the format in Legacy.
Well, the strengths are it's very fast and it's very resilient. And unlike a modern Affinity deck, you actually don't mulligan as much as the modern Affinity list does. And as far as weaknesses, I would say there's specific matchups that are very bad, like the Lands opponent I just played last round, and Miracles, and Maverick Stoneforge.
Yeah.
Probably the three matchups I would least likely want to play.
Right, the Lands deck always a beating for most aggressive strategies, it seems like. But you're this, we've seen the modern version of Affinity for a while, and this is just juiced. You've got the two soul lands, so you've got Ancient Tomb, City of Traders to just power out your creatures way faster. And the thing that stood out to me was when you played Tangle Wire. This is a cube all-star, but now you're bringing it to the forefront here in this deck.
Yeah, well, the creature base of this deck is very similar to the modern list, but like you said, because of the soul lands, you could play things a lot faster than you can in modern. And with Tangle Wire specifically, if the aim of the goal of my deck is to empty my hand as quickly as possible, usually this happens on turn 1 or turn 2. I'm pretty close to Hellbent already. Tangle Wire is naturally just a great follow-up to slow them down. And with all the surplus permanents I have, it doesn't affect me as badly. And also in this format, people traditionally tend to have less permanents than they do in other formats. Right. So Tangle Wire is annoying for a lot longer than it normally would be.
Sticks around, yeah. So you get to just vomit your hand on the table. You have your zeros, of course, Midnight, Ornithopter. Then you have Volt Scourge, Signal Pest, Frogmite, which is basically free in this deck. And then you just get to drop that, keep your opponent locked down while you just beat them down.
Yep, I dump my hand on turn 1 and turn 2. Sometimes I dump my hand with all my creatures and a cranial plating on turn 1 or turn 2.
Cranial plating, of course, just an absolute beating if you can resolve that.
Yep.
Interesting thing I was talking to you with earlier, we see the modern versions can choose to go the Infect route via Inkmoth Nexus. You chose to go with Blinkmoth in your build.
Yes, because people in Legacy play a lot of removal for artifacts and enchantments, sometimes more so main deck than in other formats, especially Abrupt Decay.
Right.
The odds of you animating an Inkmoth Nexus and then attaching a plating to it and connecting is very low, and whereas a regular Blinkmoth Nexus can still get pumped with Steel Overseer. It can still get a Battle Cry trigger with a Contested War Zone, compounded with all the other damage you're doing with the rest of your creatures. It's a pretty good finisher, especially if your opponent's low on life. Sometimes it just gets the last points you need in.
Yeah.
It's better than starting over on an Infect route with just a couple of Inkmoth Nexuses or Nexi.
Of course, you got Mox Opal and Ravager still. You've got Etch Champion. Now, you said Etch Champion is better in the Legacy build than it is in the modern builds.
Yeah, because it comes down a lot quicker, and people can go sideways in other formats where you're playing Affinity. If you have an Etch Champion, people can deal with taking 2 a turn, or maybe even taking a lot with the plating, and they could still go work around it. Here, it's a pretty big roadblock because it comes down very quickly.
Right.
Like mostly on turn 2.
Okay. Your mana base also has the War Zone, as you mentioned, but of course you get to play Wasteland as well, whereas the modern decks do not.
Wasteland is a new addition for this weekend. Originally I was playing more Manlands and Gaia's Cradle, which is also awesome in this deck because it's like sometimes a Mishra's Workshop or a Mishra's Workshop +1.
Right.
But it led to a lot of inconsistent hands where I couldn't cast my hand on turn 1 because I needed regular mana to put my creatures into play first. So when I switched up to Tangle Wire and the stacks-like components in my sideboard, Wasteland just seems like a natural fit to add immediately to the deck. If you're trying to beat people fast, like you can dump your hand on turn 1. On turn 2, you could attack and then kill the probably only land they have in play. So when you're dealing like 8 to 14 points of damage a turn, it's a pretty huge swing to knock out a land.
Yeah, tough for them to catch back up when you're taking out the lands while getting beat by that much. Another thing, I imagine you don't face off as much just artifact hosing as you do in Modern, where people know they have to beat Affinity. You're not going to be facing down Kataki and stuff.
There are no Katakis, no Pyroclasms. Mostly, I fear a Terminus from a Miracles deck. Some of the Maverick or Deathblade decks that have Zealous Persecution. That's really awkward to play against. But yeah, there aren't many broad hosers. And a thing with the mass removal is, like I said before, because this deck is way faster than it normally is, the window they have to use a mass removal spell is very low. So they need to have a cheap one. So I'm not really worried about Supreme Verdicts or other removal spells, only Terminus, because it theoretically costs 1 mana.
Right. They can easily have it on turn 2 or 3.
Yeah, so that's like the Nightmare card.
Yeah, so your sideboard is a almost transformational prison style deck. You've got a bunch of stuff in terms of Thorn of Amethyst. You got Winter Orb, Chalice of the Void, Pithing Needle, and Phyrexian Evoker can also play those kinds of roles. Do you normally just side into like that prison package, or are you kind of pick and choosing your matchups where these cards are coming
I pick and choose. Most of the time, half my prison cards are still in my sideboard and half go in, and then there's some matchups where the whole house just like comes inside. Okay. Usually, I just cut whatever creatures are the weakest versus the matchup, or sometimes if I feel like my plating won't connect as effectively, I'll shave like 1 copy or 2 copies in there too. And just bring in things like, bring in Thorn for like Storm, bring it to Miracles, slow them down, a bunch of other decks. Winter Orb is specifically a Miracles only card, although I boarded it in against my land's opponent last round because it's very good there. Chalice is very good against Elves, Reanimator, Storm again. And these are mainly for Sensei's Divining Top.
Right, Evoker and Top.
If you can... Miracles is a bad matchup, but if you can deal with Sensei's Top, the matchup shifts a little bit, or maybe a lot, into a lot better for me once they can't like flip tops and set up Terminuses. Yeah,
you said your main fear is Terminus. If you can eliminate them being able to manipulate their deck to get it.
Also, if you if you hit a top with Sensei's Top, they can't, and you hit like a Tangle Wire, they can't use shenanigans to Terminus on my turn or on their upkeep. And the same thing, Tangle Wire against Miracles compounds with Winter Orb. You get hit with the Tangle Wire, then you play a Winter Orb.
Oh, wow.
They can't untap lands, and they have to tap more permanents, or vice versa, the other way around.
So the one land they do get, you get to tap down.
They get hit with the Tangle Wire, and they have to pay more with Thorn, and eventually maybe an Orb comes down. So like, I try to formulate a plan of trying to slow them down, because all these things don't do anything to me. I still just drop all my creatures on turn 1 and turn 2. That's always happening when I play this deck. So
now you got 2 Jittes here. This creature matchups, I assume?
Yeah, for creature matchups, I have these Umezawa's Jittes and this pair of Curse Scrolls.
Yep, going old school.
Yeah, Curse Scroll, like I said, because I dump my hand pretty often, I'm frequently hell-bent. So in my deck, this is pretty much like a colorless Grim Lavamancer, so that can't be swords, they're bolted away. It usually just stays there all the time. And being able to pick off creatures is pretty amazing. Also in some matchups, so against some control decks, even against Miracles, I'll still bring them in because it's a pseudo sulfuric vortex too, a one-sided vortex. You can hit people every single turn. And yeah, Jittes, they're very good. I don't have to say much about that card.
Speaks for itself.
What I will say though is because all my soul lands and my opals, like the round before last, I was connecting with the Jitte on turn 2.
Not bad.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So it's a pretty cool deck. You only have 1 colored spell, and that's technically Vault Scourge, which you're not playing colored mana for anyway.
Nope.
So mono artifacts, looks sweet. You're doing pretty well today. I've seen you play it a lot. You guys should give it a try. Ashok, thanks for sitting down with me here in the
Thank you.
sideboard. Good luck the rest of the way, and stay tuned to StarCityGames.com for the rest of the action here in Worcester.